Ready Player One. We decided we were going to take two different routes to the film just to see what we thought we would want to do with it. I read the book first, and Nathan did not.
And that goes along with my long-standing rule for myself is that if I read a book, it's going to be after the movie.
Yeah, and
because I'd rather see a movie and then have the book add to it than to see the movie and go, well, that's different, or that's not in the book,
Well, which you might find to be most of the film in this case.
And honestly, I've listened to a few reviews, and the ones that have read the book have all said the same thing, and I'm sure you'll probably talk about this too, but they've all said they changed this, they changed that. It was this way in the book. This wasn't in the book. This was in the book, but they left it out. And there seems to be a lot of things that were changed. And
well, when since this is our first review, should we just go off the cuff and just say, look, at this point, it's all spoilers. There's no reason to hide anything.
Well, yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't know if I have the ability to hold back things that might be spoilery, or I might not think something was a spoiler, and somebody listening might say, "Why did you spoil that for me?" So we'll just say, "Look, if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to know anything, stop right now.
Exactly.
Come back later.
Now.
Come back later."
If you've read the book and you haven't seen the movie, don't listen, because we're going to talk about a good bit of both. And I don't feel like, it's kind of hard to spoil a book because it could take you a few days to read a book.
Well, and honestly, listening to people talk about the movie and the book, I kind of feel like I don't want to read the book now that I've seen the movie.
Well, it's different. There were some things about the book that I really, really enjoyed. It was easy to get lost in a lot of the references that they made in the book.
Yeah, I'll say this. You and I were talking about it, and you mentioned the fact that, look, there's just too much. There's just too many references. And
that was.
And I was telling you that the way I really enjoyed the movie was just to quit looking for stuff. Just watch the story. Stop even trying to see all the references, because there's no way. And I can't imagine, even though you could take your time and read through and read every single reference, I can't imagine reading the constant barrage of references.
Well, and there were so many things, and a lot of it was it was very 1980s heavy, because in the novel and also in the movie, the Halliday, he was just this big 80s geek, right?
Right.
And everything was about the 80s, and there were so many 80s references.
Oh man, I've been all about the 80s forever. So even when I first started seeing previews of this movie, I was so ready for it. And I told myself the first preview I saw, I was like, man, I can't wait to see that. And of course, the movie starts out, I mean, from the time the curtain is drawn open, you've already got awesome music. And you have in the first time you go into the Oasis and you see the virtual world.
To me, that was a really cool point, was actually getting to see that.
Right.
And it was, I mean, we've played, I mean, you're the VR addict, and I've played a little bit with it, not nearly as much as you have. And one thing that you always talk about is how immersive these things are. And the beginning of the movie, it played pretty straight with the book. There were a lot of references, and it talked about Halliday and the hunt for the egg and all that good stuff.
In that first scene where he's coming, sliding down the pole, and he's going over to where he steps into VR, and he passes by all the different people doing things in VR, and when it shows you all that at first, before you even get to see the virtual world, you see the people in their own homes doing various things in virtual reality. And then when he puts his goggles on, he puts his headset on, and he's on the omnidirectional treadmill, which is something that I've said for a long time. Like that's going to be the pinnacle of it, I think.
Oh, it's coming.
When you can just walk, and they have them, just not commercially available, and nobody could afford one anyway. But they do exist. So, watching this movie was perfect for me, because I was like, this is where VR is heading. The haptic suits, they already have haptic feedback. They have different gloves and different vests that you can feel things just like you see in the movie. Now, it's not that advanced, but they're working on it. And
well, I'm sure. I heard a statistic, and I don't know how true it is. I heard it several years ago that technology doubles itself every 10 years.
Right.
Which may or may not be true, but, just considering, where we have come from since you and I started college. I mean, you might remember my first email address was a Hotmail, and that was when I was a freshman in college, and I'm trying to figure out, this is kind of cool, and then...
You mean it wasn't AOL?
No, I didn't. No, it wasn't AOL, because you actually had to pay for AOL.
That's
Hotmail
right.
was free.
That's right. Hotmail was one of the only free ones.
Yeah, it was. It was MSN, I think.
Yeah.
Was it? I don't know, but kind of going back to what we were saying before with the novel, a lot of the things that showed up in the novel, something that I told you. That I just kind of started to gloss over them after a while, because a lot of them, a lot of those references, even though I grew up in the 80s and a lot of those things jumped out as familiar, a lot of them were not familiar.
Well, there were so many that, as I said, as I was listening to different people review the film, they would bring up like, I noticed this or noticed that, and I thought, well, I never saw that.
No,
and it could have been because, like I said, I had just stopped looking for stuff, so I only noticed like the main things that they mentioned.
Oh yeah, the things right in the middle of the screen.
So I keep thinking. I was trying to think back, just the ones that I can recall from the movie, and I know good and well it's probably a very small percentage of what most people could even recall, because, like I said, after the first race, I kind of said to myself, I'm like, if I'm going to enjoy this movie, I've just got to watch it without scanning the screen constantly to see what I can find.
Right. Yeah. That's
because that's a lost cause.
Yeah, you would actually have to do that about the third or fourth time you watch the film.
Yeah, and I just keep thinking, like, I'll get it on Blu-ray, and then I'll just have to pause every scene.
Yeah,
is what it boils down to.
At the point where they start talking about the race, and then they actually show up at the race, that was the point where I realized that I'm going to have to take this movie and realize that the movie is not the book.
Right.
Because there is no such thing as a race.
Yeah, and I've heard that the first key is completely different in the book.
Yeah, no, it's completely different. And we're introduced to Wade, and we're introduced to Parzival, otherwise known as Z, throughout most of the film. He in the book, he's very poverty stricken, and he's kind of poverty stricken in the movie as well. But the difference is that it's kind of one of those things. It's almost like a pay to play, where you have you're able to get certain things if you pay money, but he didn't have money to pay, so
right.
He got to do a couple little things here and there if he could talk somebody else into helping him out.
It's those dreaded microtransactions.
Yeah, it's those microtransactions that happen to show up in that latest Star Wars review that you did, right?
Right, and I've heard more. Yeah. I've heard more than a few people mention that the villain of the movie is the perfect embodiment of these big corporations that aren't really into games. Mm-hmm. They're just in it to make money, and they don't really enjoy games or know much about what it is that makes them fun. They're just trying to make the most money they can. And Ben Mendelsohn is the actor, I think, and he plays it perfectly too.
Yeah, he did a really good job. His avatar. What did you think about his avatar? The Sorrento avatar.
Well, I liked just about everybody's avatar.
Yeah,
and we've already said spoilers, so I'll just go ahead and say it.
Absolutely.
I liked his avatar, but I liked what his avatar jumped into later in the film more than that.
Oh yeah, no kidding. See,
when he busted out the Mecha Godzilla, I thought, at first I thought, they're in trouble, and then I thought, well, maybe they can gang up on him, but Mecha Godzilla was wrecking shop for a little while.
Yes, he was, and that was kind of the thing. It actually showed that was one thing they stuck with in the novel as well, or from the novel, I should say. He was Mecha Godzilla. He was killing both his Sixer army and his and his enemies, and he was doing some damage.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've
sure.
Like I said, I've heard a few different reviews, and I've heard people that have read the book, and then people that hadn't read the book, and it seems to be the general consensus. And I don't know if you and I will come down in the same way or not, but people who have read the book didn't seem to like the movie as much as people who'd never read the book. And part of that, I guess, was because of all the differences, or maybe they were confused or weren't getting what they expected. Or
I kind of feel like that's probably going to be pretty accurate because, I ran into, I walked out of the theater, and I ran into Jamie, and he said that he had seen Jamie from the Diplocon.
Right.
He was handing out flyers and stuff at the Malco. And I said, I just came to see the Ready Player One, and he said, yeah, I saw it yesterday. I thought it was really good. And then I was, to be honest, I wasn't sure what I thought about it because of the fact that I had read the book first, and there were so many kind of glaring differences. A big difference. Halfway through the film, he actually meets Sam.
Right.
And that doesn't happen in the book. He doesn't meet Sam until the very end.
I had heard that, and that was probably the only thing. Like I've said before, that when I'm watching a movie, I'm not watching it with any kind of analytical eyes or to say, well, that wouldn't happen in the story, or this plot doesn't make sense. I'm usually just enjoying what I'm seeing. And then later I'll think about it. But one of the things that, after thinking about it a little bit, one of the things that I just really didn't get, it's not that I didn't like it, because at the time I was watching it, I didn't care. But when they're in the club and they're dancing in the air, and he just busts out "But I love you."
Yeah.
And I think back on that, and I'm like, it's too soon, man. You're going to drive her away.
It really is, that whole dichotomy there, I think, felt really rushed.
I thought initially that his being enamored with Artemis was that Artemis was somehow this great player,
Well, and that it kind of goes a little bit more in depth in the novel. It talks about Artemis. You think about. Now you think about famous YouTubers, not like those OmniGeek guys. But you think of famous YouTubers or people on Instagram or whatever, and you have she's one of those people.
Right.
And so before he ever meets her, he already knows who she is, and it kind of hints at that, but it never really goes.
Well, I mean, like I said, that's like when they're lining up for the race in the beginning of the movie, and she pulls up beside him, and he's telling his buddy, like, "Hey, you see who that is? You know that's Artemis." You know,
right?
I got the sense that she's just an awesome player, that he's kind of idolizes or whatever, or almost like a celebrity. Is like, oh, she's right there. But then it's like 2 minutes later, he's like professing his undying love for her, and I'm like, that's crazy, fella.
But there's the thing is let me think how to put it. They really don't. They don't really meet until after. Well, okay, they meet right before they get the first key.
Okay.
Or right before Parzival gets the first key. And it's, I feel like you would have enjoyed kind of the way that it was done in the novel more, because it plays back to some, first of all, it's like old Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And then it's the video game Joust.
Yeah, you were telling me the other day that game plays heavily in the book, and then you don't even see it really in the film. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of video games on display in the film, but you don't see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times it's funny because throughout the novel, and especially in the hunt for these keys, the whole thing is a game. The whole oasis is a game, and you find yourself at one point you're role playing in a movie, and you're playing Matthew Broderick's character, where you're playing another game.
Yeah.
So you're playing a game while you're playing a game.
That's war
while
games.
You're playing another game.
That's war games, right?
Yeah.
And you don't, and that's not in the movie at all.
No, not at all.
Now, I will say that probably my favorite part of the movie was the whole Shining sequence.
That was good.
It was so well done. And a lot of people I've heard say, "Oh, well, these clues were just so easy. Like, I knew what they were going to do." And I'm thinking, I think you're just saying that. I understand that, like, at the beginning of a race, driving backwards at the start is a trick that a lot of people try.
Right.
But beyond that, as far as the clues that he's laying out, you kind of have to know the story that's been written to begin to figure out the clues. So to say, "Oh yeah, I knew that all along," I don't think you did.
No. Well, I'm trying to remember. I don't think this Shining showed up in the novel. I do know that there were a couple times that you actually had to play through, and you had to recite the words of whatever character you were at any given time.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, and kind of going back to the Artemis thing, and it in the film it doesn't really go in depth with it, but there's a period of time over a couple weeks where Parzival almost even abandons his hunt for the egg just so he can spend time with Artemis.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't go into that. They meet up a couple times, maybe 3 times. He gets the key, then she gets the key, and then there's that time in H's garage, which wasn't a thing in the novel, and then that was about it. Then they went to this. They went to the archive. And then she asked him out at the archive, and then they go to this club, and then he's in love, which doesn't make sense. To me, that's just kind of pushed.
Well, there's going to be some things that when you begin to think critically about it, things that don't really make sense. Now, like I said, I enjoyed this movie, and I'm going to buy it and watch it again. And
I'll probably watch it again.
Probably watch it again. I mean, it won't be as much as certain movies that I watch over and over and over, but I'll pull it out every now and then and watch it, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, just to catch some of the things you might not have caught before.
But thinking critically about it, one of the things that bugged me more than anything, and I actually, this is something I actually thought about while I'm watching it, and I've already heard that this is not the case in the book, but in the movie, they're all neighbors. Like everybody in this virtual world that winds up, fighting on the high five,
Right. They all live in Cleveland.
Right. They're all neighbors, and a couple of them very close neighbors. And I was like, how is that even possible in this massively multiplayer online world?
That was one of the things that really made me mad is you have these great players. You have H, and H, they didn't talk about how mobile H was.
Right.
H was, it talked about it a little bit in the novel that, okay, H has this van, and that's where H does most of his work.
We're in spoilers. You can say it.
Yeah. His work.
Quote his word.
Dato and Sho, and I don't know why they took in the novel it's Shoto. I don't know why they shortened it to Sho in the.
Well, and I heard that in the book, the Japanese players actually live in Japan.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? They live in Japan. H is mobile, so H can show up anywhere, anytime.
Right.
You have to give him time to get there. Artemis doesn't live. To be perfectly honest, Parzival doesn't live in Cleveland either. He moves to Cleveland eventually. Okay, since we're all in spoilers here, in the book, there's a point where he shaves every bit of body hair off so that he can better fit into his suit.
Makes sense, but that wasn't in the movie.
No,
I'm glad they left that scene out.
Yeah, and which would have been interesting, wouldn't it? I'm trying to think. He rents a place because the money in the Oasis is just as valuable as money in real life.
Yeah.
So you could use Oasis money to turn around and buy things in real life, and that's what he did. He ended up buying a flat or renting a flat for months at a time.
It's Bitcoin.
It's Bitcoin. Rented, and he never left. He never had to leave because he could order everything he needed to on the Oasis, and it'd show up in his house. Kind of my biggest issue. I say it was my biggest issue. There were several little issues, but there was a big one. My biggest problem came when he was kidnapped from his own van. You remember he was kidnapped from the van? He had not 45 seconds earlier confessed his undying love to Artemis, and then the next thing you know, she sends her face-tattooed henchman to kidnap him.
Yeah.
For no reason.
Yeah. So in other words, he had to have already been on the way.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, but that's part of that. You have to be willing to just let go and have your suspension of belief or disbelief.
Well, even if you have that, it still doesn't make sense as to why he was kidnapped.
Well, I know
because he'd already said he loves her, and then she's going to have him kidnapped just so she could bring him
there.
And
while I was watching the movie, I just thought, okay, she's having him kidnapped to keep from him being found by the other people looking for him. But then, like I said, while I was watching the movie, I didn't even think about, well, how did that happen so fast?
Yeah. That did.
And that's a lot. That's a lot of those things that you start to think about kind of after the fact.
And then just kind of another aside was that, she says, "Welcome to the rebellion." There's no rebellion. There was no rebellion.
There's one girl and a few friends that are following.
Yeah, and a bald guy with a face tattoo that ends up getting them caught because he's got a very distinguishable face tattoo. It's kind of his fault.
Yeah, that kind of makes it really easy on the face recognition software when you have a distinct facial tattoo. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, if you're going to paint your van and you're going to put a weird sign on the side of your van, don't be surprised if somebody can pick it out of a lineup.
Also easily identifiable, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of a big dummy situation there.
And, we were talking about the VR before. And I've done a few videos on my VR wish list. And what that is I play some games that aren't in VR that I wish were in VR, and then I'll do a little video about it, just saying, like, look how awesome this game is. How amazing would it be in virtual reality? Right. I don't think right now there's a massively multiplayer virtual reality game. I don't remember ever seeing one.
Yeah,
and
well, it would be tough.
That's essentially what the Oasis is. And I know that as technology progresses, as speeds get faster, as headsets get more and more high resolution, computers are going to get cheaper. Computers that are able to handle this type of stuff are going to get cheaper. The day will come, I hope, that there's a massively multiplayer virtual reality game. Now, I hope it's not a situation where we live in a place like the Stacks and we just have to escape that life. But I think
the Stacks were well done.
Yeah, I think it's coming. The Stacks were neat to see. It's interesting. All of these movies like this have that dystopian feel. Like you would hate to live in this world. Like. All of them, all of the futuristic movies, and I think there's a few of them that look a lot like the Stacks do in this one. They kind of have that same feel as far as the atmosphere or whatever. But it's interesting that they can leave that world and go into the Oasis, and it's not just like a few gamers that are going into the Oasis. It literally is everyone, because their lives are so horrible that the only thing they do is earn a little money and then go play in the Oasis.
Right. And because of how bad actual life is, I guess, you have to go.
And the thing is, well, I was reminded of another movie. It's not really about, I guess it is about virtual reality, but it's not in this same way. But the movie Surrogates, have you ever seen that?
I've not.
With Bruce Willis. But it's this same thing where people just log in their homes, and everyone in existence is living lives through their surrogates. Now, it's not virtual reality. Their surrogates are actually going out of the house and living life. But they stay in their chair the whole time. And so the people in reality, they look horrible and they're unkempt, but their surrogates all look like models,
yeah.
But I was thinking about that movie, just watching Ready Player One. I was like, this is a little bit like Surrogates. Surrogates not exactly the same thing, but the one thing I did like, and like I said, I hope that actual VR gaming reaches this to where it's affordable, to where you can have, I know it's not going to be like chump change, but if you could spend about what you'd spend on a computer, you could take about what you would spend on a computer and buy an omnidirectional treadmill.
That would be cool.
That'd be ideal. It would take forever probably to get to that point. But
I don't know if that's something that we'll actually see in our life.
You have some people that would enjoy that, and then you have other people that would much rather just sit in a chair and move some thumbsticks. Even VR, the way it is right now, there are games that are room scale, and you have to get up and move around. There's some boxing games and stuff like that you actually have to do some physical activity.
Yeah, I might actually be interested in doing some of that as opposed to, actually getting hit in the face by somebody.
That's the better way to do it, right?
Yeah. And, that was, I don't know, kind of going back to this whole thing. I think eventually that's kind of the point that that they come to, that especially that was the point that Halliday wanted to get across, was that this is cool, but it's not real life.
Yeah. I play games, have played games most of my life, and since VR has been a legitimate thing, and 2016 was the PSVR's release, I've been into VR, but I still agree with that. Like, you can't even approach real life that way. Like, it's a nice escape sometimes, or it's fun to play these things, but you have to pull away from the screen sometimes and go live your life.
Of course.
And that was a good message to see at the end of the movie, that the creator of the whole Oasis and everything is saying, look, what's better than real life?
I want to say that I found the book in, I bought it at Barnes & Noble. It was in the teenage section.
Yeah.
And, the characters are teenagers, but the language is not really... I mean, it's not like... Quentin Tarantino or anything, but
I'm sure, and I'm under no delusions. I'm sure that there are plenty of teenagers that use foul language and other things like that. Of course. Now, watching the movie, there's very few words, but then there's one that I just did not, I wasn't expecting it, and it's the only time the whole movie you hear that word. And it's just it's kind of jarring when you hear it. When you're watching something like Deadpool, it's not that big a deal. You know what you're in for. But when you're watching a movie like this, and it's PG-13, you don't expect that kind of language, and you don't hear it for the entirety of the movie. And then right there in this one scene, it's just blurted out, and it was kind of jarring to hear it.
Yeah. Well, and that was, I think that. I can't complain too much because of the changes that they made in between the two. In the book, instead of they mention the Iron Giant, but he doesn't really show up. Everybody else has different giant robots, right?
Right.
Because once you got the second key, the Jade key, you got to choose a giant robot. Dato, like in the film, he's the one that ends up with the giant robot that ends up fighting off Mechagodzilla. Right, that's Sorrento's.
Yeah.
In the film, in the book, he uses an Ultraman, which ends up being the size of.
That is an oldie.
Yeah, no kidding. It ends up being the size of the Mechagodzilla, and in the film, he ended up using a
Gundam.
It was a Gundam. Yeah, it was a Gundam robot, which ended up being considerably smaller than the Mechagodzilla. And I kind of felt like, I would have really enjoyed seeing something along the lines of, if you're going to have a giant robot. Now, don't get me wrong, the Gundam thing was cool.
Yeah, but I know what you're going to say before you even
Voltron.
Say it. Yep.
I would have loved to have seen Voltron fighting Mechagodzilla.
I think Voltron would have fared a little better too.
Yeah, I agree. And then too, I just, I thought the Iron Giant, he did okay. That's kind of one of my guilty pleasure movies. I love going back and I'll watch that movie, and I showed it to Chloe one day, and at the end of it, when he blows up, he's flying up to save the town, right? Because there's nuclear, there's a big A-bomb coming their way.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's going into space, and he says, Superman. Anyway, and then he blows up, and then Chloe's crying, and then, I have to show her that, oh yeah, he's coming back. But the whole point is that I really thought that they did that character pretty well. I enjoyed seeing that. They mention it in the book, but you don't see it.
No, we just mentioned a reference that we would have loved to see, and I don't remember Voltron anywhere in there. Now, there may have been the 5 lions somewhere, and I just didn't see him. Well, let's talk about the story itself. Leave out all the references. Mm-hmm. What did you think about just the story itself, as far as, obviously the main bad guy is a guy that was trying to be a voice in the ear of Halliday, and Halliday just wasn't having it, didn't take any of his suggestions. This guy was trying to get him to monetize the thing from the get-go. And
I think that kind of goes, it kind of goes along with what you were trying to say earlier, and especially when you were talking about the Star Wars game.
Well, and I've heard a few people mention the fact that the character that Ben Mendelsohn plays is literally the embodiment of like Electronic Arts, where they're just trying to make money, and you see, like in this story, he's on the outside looking in. He's built this entire corporation that employs people just to find these Easter eggs so he can take control of the Oasis.
Yeah, and they did a poor job too. A lot of the people that worked for IOI actually worked for them. They weren't like these indentured slaves that they were.
Yeah, they're like members of the corporation.
And then
the way you find out later in the movie when they captured Artemis that there's like a whole down in the basement. They've got the indentured servants,
right? And that's kind of the bulk of the people that work there is apparently what they wanted you to believe in the movie. But overall, I thought the story was okay. It for the most part. It stayed true to what the book wanted to get across, in that, games are good. It's good to have these things so that you can have an escape from reality, so long as you don't allow it to control your life. Which is what these people had allowed the Oasis to do. I do know for a fact that Ernest Cline is already writing a sequel to the novel. I have no idea what they'll name it, Ready Player 2. But anyway, I really have a feeling that by the end of whatever number of books they end up coming out with, he's going to hit that red button at the end.
Ready Player 2 is not going to have the hundreds of references. It's just going to be a book about Luigi.
Right. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean that's the way I would go with it. But But you're right. I mean, I thought for a second watching this movie, I thought, well, he's gonna slap that button. But when he almost accidentally fell onto it, I thought, he won't do it now.
No.
Now I will say, like when he wins the contest and gets to the point where he has to sign the contract.
Yeah.
Who in the world would think, wait a minute, this is another test? I mean, most anybody who's they've just gone through all of this game and solving all these clues, and they've finally found the final Easter egg, which was a callback to the original Easter egg in video games. And that's been the point of the whole thing. And they finally figured everything out. And they're standing right in front of the guy, Halliday's avatar, that's saying, okay, you've won. Now you have control of the Oasis. All you have to do is sign right here.
Mm-hmm.
Most everybody's going to say, all right.
Because that was the end of it, right?
Right. But Wade happens to just know so much about Halliday's life.
And
that causes him to say, wait a minute. You know. And
which to
who
me,
in the world would think about that? I guess unless you had all that knowledge. Just
nobody.
Just knowing that, wait a minute, this is this exact point in Halliday's life when he would have regretted doing this, so I'm not going to sign on the line, Well, we said that we didn't want to do, or I said I didn't want to do just a straight up point system for ranking the movies. So we kind of settled on a weird scale.
It's such a weird scale.
I have been upfront about my opinion and the empirical fact that the greatest movie ever is The Princess Bride.
Of course.
So that's obviously at the top end of the scale.
Yeah, and the bottom to me by far. It was tough. It was either going to be the Brady Bunch movie or Jupiter Ascending. And I think I settled on Jupiter Ascending as the bottom. It's like the worst movie.
Well, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But most movies are going to fall somewhere between Jupiter Ascending and The Princess Bride.
Right.
What does Ready Player One receive?
Okay.
On our scale?
I'm putting this. This is going to be kind of a strange one, because I thought it was an entertaining movie. I'll probably watch it again if it shows up on HBO. Because it's worth kind of watching for a lot of the references that are made. The cast was okay. I don't think anybody just really stood out. Maybe T.J. Miller, because he always stands out in everything that he does. I feel like Simon Pegg was underutilized because he's a pretty fantastic actor, and he just really didn't do a whole lot. That character actually has a bigger part in the novel. Because they stayed away a little too much from the source material, the original source material, and I kind of feel like that Ernest Cline can kind of blame himself for this, and it's not bad. It's not bad company to be in. Decent movie. They get a little too far away from the source material. Some of the things don't make sense. I'm going to go with between Jupiter Ascending and The Princess Bride. I'm going to say The Dark Knight Rises is kind of where that lands for me, because it's something that you can go back and watch again if it shows up on television. Bane was an okay villain, but he's not what everybody was expecting. That's just kind of where it was with me. I really enjoyed Selena Kyle. She was pretty good. Anne Hathaway did a good job, but everybody else just kind of sucked it up for me. I don't know.
Well, and
that's my 2 cents.
And maybe because I haven't read the book, and I can't knock it for being different from the book, because I have no comparison. There's no way to compare it.
Right.
It's obviously nowhere near Jupiter Ascending.
Right.
I think I probably did like it a little better than you liked it.
Mm-hmm.
But also nowhere near The Princess Bride. I mean, what is,
right.
honestly? But another movie that's in this league is probably Zoolander, because of all the actors and actresses in it.
Okay.
And that movie's a fun movie, and you can rewatch it, but it's not going to win, greatest film ever awards.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And honestly, while I was watching Ready Player One, I was thinking about, I had a little thought for half a second about Zoolander because of all of the people in that movie.
Right.
And so it's kind of in that same style for me. That same vein of just all the things you're going to see.
Well, that really makes sense. Is I guess we kind of both played to the strengths of the film. But yeah, Batman was in the film, and with yours, you drew on the number of characters and references. Okay, that makes sense. So I think the general consensus is that it wasn't a bad film. It's not. Yeah, it's not going to win a lot of awards.
It's getting some okay reviews, and like I said, it's been pretty much down the line. Anybody that's read the book first, the reviews are lower. Not necessarily bad, just not as good as the people who never read the book. I kind of just look at it as if it's like a popcorn flick. I mean, it obviously has flaws in some of the characters, flaws in some of the plot, and some of the things that go on. They'll stand out if you start to analyze things. But just for the action sequences, they're well done, and they did a good job of not really having people have a big problem with the CGI because they're in a video game world, so they didn't have to make everything look photorealistic.
Well, I guess that's going to about wrap us up. Thanks, guys, so much for listening to our review of Ready Player One. Peace.